So, you've probably been scrolling online and seen some of those videos, people running on all fours with incredible agility, or maybe talking about feeling a phantom tail. Well, today, we're diving into the culture behind it all, therianthropy, and we're going to focus on two huge parts of it: the internal experience, what they call shifts, and that seriously impressive physical sport known as quads. For a lot of people, it all starts with a feeling that's just really hard to describe. Like this person from our source material put it, I've always dealt with the feeling of not feeling like I'm quite human. And that feeling, that sense of being a little different, is often the first step on the path to figuring out what therianthropy even means to them. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to get a really solid definition of what this is all about, and just as importantly, what it isn't. Then we'll get into the internal side of things, talking about shifts. After that, we'll look at the physical expression, the sport of quadrobics. And to wrap it all up, we'll go over how to practice it safely. Okay, first things first. To really get a handle on any of this, we have to start with the absolute basics, a core definition that everything else is built on. So our source material defines the therianthropy as the involuntary experience of animalistic or non-human behavior on a non-physical level. And I really want you to focus on that word, involuntary. It is absolutely crucial here. The sources make it super clear that this isn't seen as a choice or some online trend, but as a really deep, personal experience someone has. And that leads us to this next point, which is a really important distinction. Therianthropy is framed as an internal experience that a person has, which isn't exactly the same as an external identity that they choose to put on. It's a subtle difference, but it's a really critical one for understanding the perspective here. All right, now that we have a working definition, it's time to clear the air. Let's tackle some of the biggest myths and misconceptions that you've probably seen floating around online. Okay, let's just rip the Band-Aid off and set the record straight. First off, the sources are crystal clear. Therianthropes know they are biologically human. Second, this is not the same thing as the furry fandom. They're separate communities. That wild story about litter boxes in schools, yeah, that's been widely debunked as a political myth. And it's really important to note this has nothing to do with NSFW content, and it should absolutely not be confused with being transgender. They are completely different things. So, with those myths out of the way, we can dig into the really fascinating internal side of therianthropy. This is something experienced through what are called shifts. The sources describe shifts as these spontaneous or sometimes triggered events. But here's the key. They are non-physical. I'm going to say that again. Non-physical. This is not about someone literally changing shape. It's all about an internal feeling, a change in mental state. It's something that happens entirely on the inside. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because there are two main types of shifts. On one hand, you have phantom shifts. This is a sensory thing, like feeling limbs that aren't actually there, maybe a tail or ears or even wings. Then, on the other hand, you have mental shifts. This is all about your mindset, thinking in a more animal-like way, or feeling like you're in the mental headspace of an animal for a little while. So, we've talked about the internal experience. Now, let's flip the coin and look at a popular external one, the athletic and really impressive sport known as quads, or just quads for short. So what are quads? Well, it's a physical sport that involves moving on all fours. But our sources are really quick to point out that this is not just crawling around. Think of it more like a super fluid, powerful, and animal-like version of a bear crawl. It is a serious, full-body workout. And yeah, don't let it fool you. This is physically demanding stuff. Just look at this chart. Quadrupedics requires a ton of arm, core, and leg strength. Plus, you need some serious stamina and flexibility to do it well, even for just a little while. It's no joke. But here's something that is absolutely crucial to understand. Doing quads is not like a requirement to be a therian. For some people, it's a fantastic form of exercise and self-expression. For others, it actually helps with what they call species dysphoria, that feeling of being disconnected from their human body. But for a lot of other therians, it's just not something they do. It's a personal choice. And because it is such a physically intense sport, our sources put a huge emphasis on one thing. You've got to practice safely to avoid getting hurt. So the sources actually lay out a pretty clear training plan. First, you got to build up your stamina with stuff like light running or walking. Second, warm up with dynamic stretches. That means movement-based warm-ups, not just holding a stretch. Third, you need to strengthen the areas that take the most impact. So think ankles, wrists, and your core. And finally, and maybe most importantly, pace yourself. Don't go all out on day one. And here are just a few last rapid-fire safety tips to keep in mind. Always try to land on your palms, not your fingers. That's a good way to get hurt. Keep your knees up off the ground to avoid scrapes and bruises. Be honest with yourself about your physical limits. And please, please do not start out by trying jumps. You've got to work your way up to those slowly. So let's just tie this all up with a neat little bow. Therianthropy, as it's described in our sources, is an involuntary, internal experience that's often expressed through things like mental and phantom shifts, and for some, but not all, it's also expressed externally through the physically demanding sport of quadrupeds. And all of this kind of leaves us with a really fascinating question, one that goes way beyond this one topic. In our own lives, how do we draw the line between an identity we choose to build for ourselves and a deep-seated experience that we just have? Something to think about.